Hello everyone, Washkonde here, and today, well, I just watched Seaspiracy on Netflix, and I really would like to talk about this whole topic of the pollution of the world ocean, and of course, what does it all mean from the facts or speculations that were made in the film. Let's see what's up. I think a lot of documentaries these days, such as Seaspiracy, are made in such a way that you already kind of feel alert and that you're eager to do something to change the whole situation after you are usually hearing about some devastating news that are presented in such a film. And it definitely wasn't a different situation for me. I am a human being, which is also feeling some sort of urge to be fair and transparent and try to live a sustainable life and try to live in peace and balance with my environment, other people, nature, and other things. And I reckon that the human impact on Earth is significant, and I think we all understand that, and especially we hear from mainstream media how important our individual level of waste each year and how it adds up and accumulates over years, and then we all need to start doing something in order to prevent from a lot of things from happening. Like, that's why we all have these serious conversations about recycling, about not using the disposable things like plastic forks, plastic knives, plastic straws. Just try to get rid of plastic and trying to live more sustainable. Maybe not go to buy a plastic water bottle, but try to buy a reusable one so you can always refill the water. All these good things that I think we, as trying to be conscious about our decisions, about sustainability, people would try to do. I think this is sort of the question that everybody needs to answer for themselves, whether they are feeling that this is the main problem, really, that they are the main problem, and what they need to change about their lifestyle is actually meaningful towards the global changes of climate, towards changes in the environment, towards all this devastating news that we are all seeing in the news outlets, how a dolphin ate a plastic bag and suffocated and died, or some whales pretty much again jumping out of the water and dying, and then people finding out that they actually ate a lot of plastic and it was terrible for them. And I think everybody seeing this picture, we feel much more empathic when we see that actually the impact of our doings, which is most of the times in these sort of situations, the plastic waste that is being eaten by this wildlife, mostly it's something that like us individuals will throw away, like all these plastic bags and containers and all the other things that I already mentioned. However, especially after watching this documentary, I never probably paid enough attention towards how much of an impact each individual is making. And I still believe, and I think it's proven fact, that most of the pollution and most of the environmental terrible things that are happening are not only caused by just us all individuals, but it's still predominantly by the industry, and we still need to, besides of course still living a good sustainable life and making good sustainable decisions, we all should also try to make sure that the governments are regulating things, and not just regulating them, but they are overseeing that all the legislation that they may be taking and all the good things that politicians sometimes may decide to do as laws are actually being followed. Because from what I understood from the film, a lot of regulations are just being ignored, and there is no real control system that actually checks whether people are following it. So let's start with this. Seaspiracy, I really like the way it's built. So let's maybe try to talk about not necessarily only about the topic that is covered in the film, but the whole way it was built. So I really like the personal approach the author of the film took. So the director Lee Tahibi, he pretty much told his own story about how him being a young kid back in the days, and he's now a young man, he was worried about the environment. He was always excited about all these great creatures from the ocean, like whales, dolphins, and he enjoyed always watching them, watching the documentaries that were made by such great examples like David Attenborough or Jacques Cousteau. So, he had the passion. He had the passion for the sea, and he had a passion for all the creatures of the sea. And after, of course, seeing and hearing that so much problem is actually caused by us individuals, and that a lot of wildlife is dying just because of plastic, at least this is the way that it's all being presented in the mainstream news, he went on a journey, and he first decided to start from himself again, as most of the people do, and he was this kind of activist who went out on his local town beach and started to pick up the garbage, knowing that he's doing a good thing. But then he realized that as much as he would try to pick up as much trash from the sand, he realized that it's still not enough, and there's still a lot of things just around, or a lot of litter, unfortunately, still being thrown there. So after this, he actually started to dig further and further, and he tried to understand what is exactly the level of the problem people are mostly talking about. And then he realized that there are still horrible things happening, like dolphins and whales are being killed despite the regulations against such hunts. And after he heard the news that Japan officially allowing dolphin hunting again, whale hunting as well, he was devastated and decided to learn more about that, and basically he learned more and more facts about what was happening. Actually, because of the impact of the commercial fishing, it is much more hurtful for ocean ecosystem rather than our plastic, even though of course it is the problem. But it seems after watching this film that this problem is over exaggerated, and the actual problem lies within the regulations for commercial fishing, because basically there is a lot of overfishing happening, and the demand is probably growing, and a lot of people trying to get into the business, or they've already been there, and this industry, despite being heavily subsidized, is still profitable for certain groups of people, of course. And what he basically finding out from, starting just from his passion and then seeing this bit in the news, he started to follow more and more, and he found out that all these ocean protective organizations who are known for having a high reputation, they're actually affiliated with this companies who are doing commercial fishing. And then basically all the labels saying that this tuna, for example, is dolphin free, basically no dolphin died or was caught as a bycatch during the fishing, it all turned out to be just a fiction. It all turned out to be that the Earth Institute, who was issuing this kind of label, who was issuing this sort of certification, basically they don't really have any process to check whether it is legitimately true what they're saying and what the producers putting on the cans without the allowed fish product. And what he found out that by talking with more and more and interviewing more and more people who are actually in this sort of activist space, all these big funds, they're actually doing the certification, saying that there was this sustainable fishing happening when this can of tuna was made. He basically found out, speaking with all the experts, that there is a lot of wildlife just dying as a part of the bycatch. Let me explain what bycatch actually is. Basically, bycatch is the case when, for example, there is a ship that is in the sea and it's trying to catch tuna. And for example, dolphins, they are also feasting on that kind of fish, of course. And then what it turns out to be that when this fisherman, they catch tuna with the nets. It happened to be that the dolphins also end up in those nets. And because this is not their end product, they basically end up either killing or hurting them, or even sometimes, because of course, none of the fishermen usually would think about how delicate those creatures are. They would maybe throw them back into the sea, and dolphin would die first, maybe from just being for too long out in the air, out of the water, and then maybe just breaking themselves after being basically smashed against the water, Unfortunately, there is no delicate things, and there is no process to actually see that. And as one of the people from those foundations, like Earth Institute, actually admitted that even though they may be sending the overseers who would check whether is legitimately true, that there are no dolphins being hurt during the process, they all can be easily bribed. And after admitting that on camera, he tried to hide the fact that he said it, and basically that their label is legitimate. But even though that kind of looked a bit tricky, knowing that it all was on camera, you would also try to think that it's not all that clear in the fishing industry. Following the trail further and further, he was talking to European Commissioner, who is basically regulating the fishing, and that guy was also saying something about the sustainable fishing, which is something that nobody could even properly define, and basically even fishing farming as not a good way to actually do this sustainable fishing, as everybody's sort of talking about in these environmental organizations. What also turned out to be that those organizations who were saying that people need to, that the biggest problem is use of the plastic straws, and that horrible things are happening to the wildlife because of this, it turned out to be that only 0.03% are causing the problems. And actually, of all the waste, plastic waste in the water, is that. And there is this great Pacific garbage area, which is quite significant. And basically, what Ali said to one of the foundations who were trying to go and prohibit all the usage of the plastic cutlery, he mentioned that actually 46% of all the garbage in that plastic waste space is actually fishing plastic nets, and that the foundation hearing these allegations, and basically the most common answer would be the ones that we all hear from the mainstream media, would be that it's microplastic, usually being so harmful to everyone, despite I think I do believe that it is still harmful, and that nobody should say that we should all just forget and don't do anything about our own individual contribution towards the waste. But it still seems to be that only that part of the equation could be put as a main problem towards the other people, just because there is a huge lobby happening for all these kind of organizations. Basically, they are being sponsored by those fishing companies and fishing industries who are paying to be labeled as dolphin-free or fish-friendly, whatever. I'm not sure if fishing could be fish-friendly. And so going for all these facts, talking to all the politicians, all these foundations, Ali actually ended up in a conclusion that the best way for the ocean to bounce back would be for people to pretty much try to cut down consuming seafood, or eating the sea plant replacements for the seafood, like some shrimps made out of the sea plants, something that could be something like a new way for us to look at. And I think it also sounded a bit like there is another lobby happening for those producers of this kind of products, but it did seem, and I think we all know that, for example, if you would look at the production and the expenses of the resources for the livestock versus the plants and just the crops and all the other things that are usually people would be harvesting and growing, much more resources are being used on cattle and taking care of it, and sometimes it's even in less humane conditions, you know. Also, so basically in the Seaspiracy, one of the badass things that I learned from Seaspiracy is that there is this badass group of people, I think their organization called Sea Shepherds, and what they're actually doing, they pretty much like buccaneers of representing the wildlife and the sea. They were ramming some of the ships of those who are doing some illegal fishing and some other illegal activities, and those fishermen who are also like not really sustainable and fair, and those who are pretty much catching dolphins and killing them. And they've built their ships in such a way that they'll be able to ram it, and took a board on all these ships, and basically they sank about 20 ships since the day they started to do the activities they've been doing, which is like, damn, something like this is happening in real world. This is crazy. I never thought about that. And you know, the whole film has been so much entertaining and great and interesting, and of course a lot of conspiracies were learned, and there is of course a lot of corruption among all these foundations. Politicians are covering up for the huge fishing lobbies, and basically I think the most crazy fact that I've learned from this is basically the estimate of how many subsidies are being given to fishing industry is about $35 billion a year, while UN estimating that about $30 billion is needed to end world hunger. And all this commercial fleet, they're also pretty much causing a lot of trouble for those people who are already suffering from hunger as well. You know, like for example in Liberia, there was an episode in the film that Ali showed that the local fishermen, they need to go kayaking to catch some fish really out in the ocean, just because the commercial fleet usually catching all the fish closer to the shore, and that requires people to take much greater risks in order to survive, as otherwise they will not be able to sustain themselves at all. So the problem of overfishing is high. The problem of how I think the greed of people at the end of the day is causing so much trouble that it hurts me to say that I have like no much hope towards how we can even change this. And perhaps like the decisions that were presented, that we can stop eating fish, or we can stop doing some other things that basically will show us our support towards the fishing industry, probably with the system that we've built so far, they're ready to corrupt to continue. Like it seems like the money is having the most meaningful word in this world at this point, and unfortunately, what can we do? But as one woman who was interviewed during this film was who was also a big marine biologist, she said that of course there is no one who can do everything, but if everyone will do a little thing, we'll be able to overcome this problem and solve it. So I do agree with it, and I do believe that maybe if we all gonna make more conscious choices about the way we eat, the way we deal with our waste, and all these life choices that we're making about our being, and trying to be more sustainable, more conscious about our decisions, and more mindful about the environment, perhaps this will change things for better, even though maybe our individual impact is still not as big as it's trying to be presented in mainstream media. And you know, it does seem like at the end of the day, all these burdens being brought on the consumers, whether these are the companies, the businesses who are hurting the planet the most. Yeah. Well, after hearing all this, would you stop eating fish? Would you stop eating seafood? you have some other decisions, maybe you have some more critique, maybe you've heard that actually this film is misrepresenting some facts. I'm really curious to hear all of that in the comments. I personally actually, after watching some films about meat, maybe more short videos, and not necessarily about the meat industry, but more about the health benefits of not eating a lot of meat, and the way it's been super terrible for the environment, besides just also all the animal cruelty that's happening in this industry. I decided to reduce eating meat, and I'm trying to eat more have a more plant-based diet. I think this is a good time for plant-based substitutes for our beloved meat and fish. Could try it further, and I suppose those will be and already are as tasty as our meat and fish products, and I suppose, of course, maybe not as fully a substitute, but they have their own interesting taste to it. So anyhow, I mean, yeah. Well, maybe it's just another thought that plant-based industry lobby is trying to put in our heads. Conspiracies. Well, again, thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next time.